So, yeah, Steve, I think you're right about this. I think the reason why they moved her to head domestic policy is because for them, the major things they want to accomplish on domestic policy are basically, things coming out of the World Economic Forum that are going to hamper the United States. That's why she's the big driver of the climate agenda and this, ridiculous push for net zero. If you're going to get to net zero, as I said on Saturday, you're going to have to do some radical things, and the vehicle rule is just that. I think it's a big deal that she's leaving. I mean, maybe it suggests that, it's just time for her to cash in and, someone in the nameless ranks of globalist types can just fill in right behind her, with her having set the agenda. And believe me, Steve, these past 2 weeks, last week and this week, they're really dropping all the hammers on the environmental policy. They have three gigantic things. They have the vehicle rule that I talked about that's going to try to force 70% electric vehicles by model year 2032. They're going to come out this week with their replacement to the Obama Clean Power Plan that the Supreme Court struck down last term in the West Virginia versus EPA case. And they've had Biden sign an executive order on so-called environmental justice, which is, truly wokeism come to environmental policy. And it's the kind of thing the left does where they, in 1984 fashion, in Winston, fashion, they redefine words, right? So environmental justice, I would submit, is neither justice nor classic environmentalism. It's essentially about creating these kinds of giant pots of money and then moving them to your favored constituencies and then using that to build more political power and undermine traditional industries in the United States.
For our audience that didn't catch it Saturday, that didn't catch the clips, real succinctly, talk to us about this radical rule change. They just decided to change the rules. It hasn't gone back to Congress. They're not trying to get a statutory change here. The rule change on environmental. They want to talk about the power plants. Another bombshell kind of this morning on the power plants. Walk me through the EV first, and let's go to the plants.
Sure. So on the EV side, they're going to ramp up the standards starting in model year 2026. And they've already done a rulemaking in this area. It basically reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the equivalent of driving up fuel economy. And if you make the standards stringent enough, Steve, right, the only way you can hit the standards is by having so-called zero emission vehicles, which are electric cars. So they recognize that, and then their modeling sort of showing if you want to hit our super aggressive standards by model year 2032, we're going to have 70% electric vehicles. And at the moment, we only have 7%. So that's a 900% increase in about an 8-year period because model year 2032 starts in 2031. And I think that's, a big issue under this Supreme Court case from last term about the major questions doctrine, because there's been no new vote on this. I don't think there's any clear indication of the Clean Air Act in Section 202, where this authority ostensibly comes from, to put us on a battery electric vehicle mandate. And as I started to say, but we ran out of time on Saturday, I've been litigating in this area for a long time. So going back to the early 2000s, before I joined the Bush administration, we managed to get a 2% electric vehicle mandate that California had pioneered. It always starts in California and was traveling to the northeastern states. We got the one in Massachusetts struck down. Not only did we get it struck down, we got it struck down and we got our attorney's fees for winning that case in the First Circuit, Steve.
Why is, I said at the time, the West Virginia case about going after the administrative state, I said at the time that actually may have a bigger impact than the Dobbs decision. Walk our audience through, why was that such important? Because, Gorsuch and these guys were essentially selected because of their outlook on the administrative state and the feeling that the administrative state had gotten too powerful. That's where Kavanaugh and Gorsuch are similar, and Gorsuch, I think, being one of the leading thinkers about this. Walk the audience through why that's such an important decision and why they're 24 hours a day figuring out to do workarounds on that decision.
Right. So, Steve, basically the decision, the West Virginia decision, is an attempt to start reviving the non-delegation doctrine. So Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution vests Congress with the lawmaking power. It doesn't vest the executive branch with the lawmaking power. It says that all laws are to be made by Congress. And so that led to, a long period of our republic where the Supreme Court recognized that you can't just, willy-nilly hand off vast amounts of authority over the national economy or over anything to unelected bureaucrats who serve in the administrative state. And, that culminated in the 1930s when, a couple statutes were struck down in these famous cases called the hot oil case and the sick chicken case. But then, Roosevelt, very angry, FDR, he threatened them with court packing, and they started to buckle at the knees, and they started to allow more and more delegations. In the 70s, we had, and 80s, we had at least some revival of that doctrine, with the court saying, look, the OSHA statutes are going too far. We have to read them more narrowly so they don't create non-delegation doctrine problems. But this latest major questions doctrine is another way to try to skin the cat in the same pro-constitutional direction and say, look, if there is a major question of economic or political significance, then there has to be a clear statement in a statute by Congress that the agency has the power to do what it purports to do. And if there's no clear statement, and the Supreme Court found that was lacking in the West Virginia case in the Clean Air Act as to setting greenhouse gas emission standards in the way they were trying to do it from power plants and generation shift, then it's unlawful. They struck it down. So, and then Justice Gorsuch, whom you mentioned, he is a big progenitor of this revival. He wrote separately, his concurrence is excellent, and it argues that the major questions doctrine shouldn't just embrace major questions as a matter of economic or political significance, but also ones that are major questions in terms of the separation of powers and federalism. So this is a major, milestone in Supreme Court history, and it's why they're trying desperately to get around it. And one of the ways they've tried to get around it, Steve, is by embedding various little things sneakily into the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is like the stealth Green New Deal.